Live from Barron, this is Derailed Trains of Thought. Welcome to episode 112 of Derailed Trains of Thoughts, your premier podcast on storytelling for the creator and consumer. Hi, Nick.
Hello, Tim.
How are you?
I am doing well. Are you doing well or are you doing good?
I'm, oh dear, you put me on the spot here. I don't know what is grammatically correct.
You're doing both.
If Weird Al was here, he would accuse me of word crimes.
Word crimes, yep.
Yeah. But hello, folks. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. In case you didn't hear, my name is Tim.
My name is Nick.
And we are coming to you from, looks kind of a medieval fantasy kind of area.
Yeah, like this big castle, kind of blocky looking now, but I don't know, it looks like it used to be nicer.
Well, actually, it looked like there's rubble all over most of it.
Oh, yeah.
This town.
There's a crowd over there?
Yeah, and there's like a pile of rubble around that one tower. And is that a dead dragon?
I hope it's dead.
Yeah, me too. It looks pretty gross, that's for
Yeah.
sure. And there are people standing on it.
And it's kind of, why would you do that?
I have no idea.
Something's happening.
Something's been going on around here, I think. I have no idea what.
But it's the end of something.
It could be. You have any clues?
It seems vaguely familiar.
Okay.
I don't know. Something from the past.
Something from the past, the distant past.
Distant span, yeah.
Maybe you should write it down sometime. Make
I
sure
could.
the story of this place stays in print.
I think that's a good idea.
An excellent thing to do. Anyway, so welcome again, folks, to Derailed Trains of Thoughts. Hey, we've got something to celebrate, Nick.
We do? Is it your birthday?
Well, no.
Oh, mine either.
No. But it is the podcast's birthday.
Ooh.
Happy birthday, podcast. Thank you for taking us, and by podcast, we mean this podcast, the one you're listening to, which has taken us on many an adventure over the years.
111 so far.
That's true. This is the 112th. Although it didn't used to take us actually very far. It seemed to be something that started happening around episode 21
Oh, that's
or so.
true. It evolved around that time.
Yeah, when we ran out of nicknames.
So what how old is a podcast, Tim?
Well, it is now 10 years old.
It is a decade old.
Yeah, believe it or not. Our first podcast came out on, or our first podcast episode came out on September 24th, 2010.
Wow.
Yeah.
It is slightly older than my son.
That's right. He was born in 2010, wasn't he?
He is 10.
Wow. That's wild. Yep, we started it.
Oh, no, he was born 2009. He's 10 currently.
Okay.
We rewind all that.
Hopefully he won't listen to this for a while.
I was just thinking he was 10, the podcast is 10. It all made sense at the time.
Okay.
But he's going to have a birthday.
He's going to have a birthday. When is in
November.
Is it November, just like many people?
Yes.
But yes, back in 2010, well, I think we've told the story before, but it's been a while. We had found that we had gotten I was at film school at the time.
You may have heard us reference that.
Back in during the first year of the podcast, I was in school for most of the first year, basically. Nick was still living in Indiana. I was in Virginia, and we wanted to be able to do a project together because we had a lot of fun talking about Lost during the last season, because the last season of Lost had been in the spring of 2010.
Yes.
And then we just hadn't gotten in touch as much over the summer, and we're like, we need to fix that. And I suggested, what if we do a podcast?
Which was a different beast back then.
It was a different beast. It's really interesting to think about how podcasting has grown since then. Like at the time, I didn't know if it seemed to me like we may have been like jumping on the coattails of something that was dying off, maybe because like podcasts have been kind of this hip techie thing back when iPods were first coming out.
Yeah.
And by 2010, iPods were kind of on their way out. Smartphones were just beginning to come out. But actually, that is exactly what the podcast needed to go from the niche audience to the popular audience.
Yeah, it is now giant.
Everyone has a podcast.
Just like our audience.
It's just like, wait, our audiences are giants?
Yeah. No, yes, they are giants. Apparently, no. We apologize to any of you who are not giants.
We're still living in a fantasy world.
There are some giants around here, I think.
That I believe it.
Yeah.
I believe it. But they're not our only listeners. We are thankful for all of you who, I mean, it's pretty fun, and we'll talk about this some more toward the end. It's pretty amazing that we've been able to hang around for 10 years. But in honor of that, we thought we'd celebrate our past 10 years by basically having an episode long Previously On. And first off, for Previously On, let's look back at some of our many topics we've had for Story School. So this is a combination Previously On and Story School.
Previously on Story School.
Basically, yeah. Story School has always been kind of the heart of Derailed Trains of Thought.
This is what we want to do most, is just discuss why stories work, or what creators do, or what doesn't work.
Yeah, what does and doesn't work, and what interests us, what intrigues us, what questions do we have. We don't necessarily claim to be experts on everything we talk about, but we are always interested in what we're talking
We're
about.
searching. We're working out, along with you probably, audience, what it means to consume entertainment, what it means to create entertainment, and how to best to do it.
Yeah. And we do enjoy having that multi approach because, one, we wanted to be accessible to other people who don't write or do filmmaking or anything like that, because America is a very pop culture heavy culture. So it's great to be able to consume stories with better understing on what's going on.
Discerningly.
Yeah. But also, it's nice to be able to give, but also we're nerds and we have a desire to create ourselves. And so we can't help but include some of that stuff too. So anyway, we thought it'd be fun to talk about like basically big picture themes and ideas that we keep coming back around to.
Because we've mentioned before, again, not many of you have probably listened to all 100, if you or 112 now.
112 now.
Good job. I mean, congratulations.
If you have listened
you
to
have
all
stuck
that.
with us.
But
Congratulations, you've won. Throwback to a couple episodes ago. But we've mentioned before that creators often, if they make enough of a thing, their kind of worldview, their sort of things where their interests will come out. You watch enough Miyazaki, there's certain themes that he just cannot escape. And that happens to most, he's just the easiest one to talk about, Tolkien or Lewis or anyone that we mention all the time. You read enough of their stuff, the things that matter come out. And we were looking back, said, there's certain things that I'm sure you can pull out from things that matter to us.
Yeah. The help make this easier and tackle, because to be honest, neither one of us had a lot of time. That's one reason why, even though this is the 10th episode, this is a little bit more laid back than some of our previous, like say the 100th episode, which was very ambitious.
Very ambitious.
Thanks to the podcasts interfering.
Yeah.
But
he spent years there.
Yeah. But the podcast understood that, so we're in a very busy season of life right now.
Yes.
So what I got to do is I went through our podcast list and basically put each episode in a category. And we won't read every single one of these, but this will kind of help us group these together a little bit. So one of the quote unquote categories I labeled was, our approach was, here's a weird genre or story element. Do audiences enjoy it? And if so, why? Because sometimes stories have some really interesting element or dark elements to it, or things that, like, when you think about it, it's like, why in the world is this a thing?
Why do we love good villains? Why do we love horror? I don't necessarily, but a lot of people do. Why do we love watching zombies try to destroy the world and fighting against them? It's like a normal, sane person doesn't want to be attacked by zombies.
Yeah. We talked about post-apocalyptic in episode 58. Villains was in episode 11. Horror was in episode 22. And I think I might actually include our lists here in the show notes in case people want to kind of jump to a very specific episode.
That would be a great idea.
I think that might be useful. But I'll also try to name drop a couple of them here in case you're curious. But yeah, it's interesting to me that a lot of stories portray events, circumstances that we would never want to be a part of.
Almost anything people watch now, you don't want. I mean, you don't want to be stranded on an island with a smoke monster. You don't want to have your plant blown up by a Death Star.
You don't want to have your daughter kidnapped by human traffickers.
No.
None of these things.
None of these things sound good.
And yet they can make for very entertaining stories. And now, obviously, sometimes some of them also, like certain tragic events, the episode 18, are also make for good drama in a like classical sense. And you can learn a lot from them. But also sometimes these even things that we've say episode 101, Apocalypse as Popcorn. These are supposedly fun movies, but they show, if you think about it, actually some terrible events.
Like, if I lived on Asgard, I don't want it blown up,
yes,
exactly, and laugh at while I'm doing it.
Yeah.
As in Thor Ragnarok. And we've answered this in various ways, but we just keep coming back to that idea that interest in relationship viewers have with, or readers with stories, is that they want to live vicarious through them. And there is a certain amount of the human who wants danger, I think. And and I don't know that that's a bad thing by any means, to have a sense of safe danger.
Yeah.
The paradox.
And I think we've also talked about how it's useful to show light on dark circumstances.
That too, yeah, on the darker side.
So that it's not something completely misunderstood. And you could say that for the depictions of evil, like the villains, or even just, what would you do if you were stuck in a tornado, in a disaster movie?
Yeah.
And you kind of live vicariously. I would be this heroic person. I would rescue my wife. I'd do this.
And to practice in story what we might have to do in real life is not a bad thing. I think Lewis talks about, you want danger in fairy tales so that children can learn to be brave and things like that. And I think at their best, the dark elements of stories are actually beneficial to being virtuous. At the worst time, it just appeals to that sinful nature of ourselves that likes to wallow in things that we should not enjoy.
Yeah. There's definitely a danger to it.
And I think that's why we keep coming back to it, because there is this two sides to it, which from our Christian point of view is very interesting, that it's both good and bad depending on how you approach it or how it's written or fill in the blank.
Yeah, I concur. Okay, so let's go on to our next category here, next theme we keep kind of circling around, or at least tendency we have. And this one I called Questioning Popular Consensus About Storytelling.
I enjoy this one.
Were you surprised that we've done this so often?
I guess I don't know that I've ever thought about it this way, but honestly, episode 52 is on my mind right now. Which is about, we talk about exposition and whether it's always bad to have exposition.
Because there's a common turn of phrase, show, don't tell, which I think is generally true.
And again, most of these things we will agree are generally true, but there are times when you judge something like that and you're like, it's doing what it's supposed to do. Another thing we come up with is that a story should be what it should be.
Yeah. It should be honest to itself and what the creator is trying to say, not try to pigeonhole a story into a specific idea.
But I get frustrated sometimes. People are like, oh, there's too much exposition, so fill in this movie blank, usually by Christopher Nolan, has too much exposition. I'm like, I don't know that that's actually a detriment to the movie I just watched about inversion, which we won't talk much about because it's still new at the time of this recording.
And I haven't seen it yet. He's talking about, but the name of the movie is Tenet.
Tenet, yep.
Yeah.
Or if you spell it backwards, Tenant.
Which just recently came out.
Which was great.
Yeah, that's one that was interesting to explore. Originality is a very early one, all the way back in episode 15, where sometimes creators get so worked up about, I want to make my story the most original thing possible. And that's not necessarily a healthy obsession.
Like we've often talked about when people take, I'm going to take this superhero and do something that's never been done with it. And then you're like, you've just broken the thing everyone likes about fill in the famous thing. Whether it's a superhero or a franchise or a book series. Like, I did something different. You're like, yes, but now everyone hates it.
Yeah. It's not the thing people loved about it.
Well, on the other hand, sometimes doing something new like that, I admire them sometimes just for gutsiness.
Yeah, it depends on how they're doing it. I feel like there's an element of pride there. Like, is this an honest, this is a good faith effort of trying to do something new with it? Or is it just in the sense of, I'll break everyone's expectations. They won't see this coming.
Yeah. I'll just kill this person because,
Yeah, it's a different mindset.
I think that word honest, I love that word honest in storytelling. I feel like we bring that up a lot too.
I think that's true.
And I think that's important. Now, I'm not sure that's used as often in discussing movies and books and stories as it should be, that you can disagree with something, but if it's, there's something good in it, even if it's disagreeable, just because the author's being true to life or consistent to a worldview. Like students right now at school, we're reading Call of the Wild. They don't much care for it because, dogs are killing each other and things. And they're like, this isn't, Log Club thing's not Christian. I'm like, no, it's not. And that's why we're reading it, to discuss those sorts of differences. I'm at Christian school. But Jack London very well presents his world, and you can say, take it or leave it, but it's not like he's trying to trick you or anything.
Sure.
So,
It's an honest work
Yeah.
of what he's trying to express.
and well done. But yes.
Sure. So some of the other popular consensus things we question you might be interested in. Episode 84 talked about simple versus complex stories, which I think probably also applies to Christopher Nolan.
Yes, that's true.
Episode 107, we talked about strong-willed protagonists, wondering if that's always as good of a thing as some Hollywood scriptwriters might tell you.
Yep.
So anyway, there's a sample of those topics.
Those are good ones. I like those.
And then this is a very consumer of stories centered one, the relationship between a story and the audience. I'm always interested in trying to figure out what is valid criticism of the story, and also just kind of examining how do we engage with stories. One of the earliest examples of this, episodes 13, we talked about how to read a story, which basically was, my idea was like, how do you honestly engage with it, with the story on its level? Follow that up with episode 14, which is on fandom.
Which you could do a fandom one nowadays and probably be
different.
Yeah,
yep. I'm sure you could find a completely different spin on it we did, because that was back in the first year.
Yeah.
Because this is something that has constantly intrigued me, and there's some other things that are kind of along these lines. Taste was episode 56.
Story ownership is one that keeps coming up.
Episode 59.
In relation to fandom.
Mm-hmm. And same with episode 106, over analyzation. This whole idea where we keep coming around to and wrestling in different ways of like, who owns the story? Who has the most proper interpretation of it? Is it the reader? Is it the fandom? Is it the original author?
And what's a proper way of, what can you get out of the story and what is just too much?
Yeah. It's something that fascinates me because in fandom, you constantly see these kinds of going back and forth of like, oh, such and such writer was just phoning it in or didn't have it planned all the way through. Okay. So did you hear this week that Daisy Ridley said in an interview that there was a lot of ideas thrown around even in the writer's circle about who Rey would be related to.
I saw a headline like that.
That she might have been a Kenobi.
Yeah.
And of course some people were like, oh, that should have happened. But I mean, for one, I don't blame the authors. I mean, George Lucas, we've said before, did not have the entire Star Wars trilogy planned out as well as some people think he did. If you go back and actually look at the history and the prior drafts and things like that. So it doesn't surprise me at all that the creators of the new sequel trilogy were debating that too.
Yeah. And then you have this whole tension between the creative process and, all the things that might have happened, might not have happened, or that editors need or whatever, and then the story itself. And like sometimes fandoms want to read into the process what the story is, and the story is a separate thing than, I almost did this, or I thought about doing this.
Mm-hmm. And the problem too is that different creators will approach that process differently. So I think that's one reason why some people get really fixated on a certain style of storytelling, like say someone who's planned the entire Brandon Sanderson, who plans an entire arc, as opposed to people who are creators who are just discovering the story as they go along.
From my understanding, Stephen King and lots of other ones. And it's just a fascinating thing because we live in a story. We have one called Entertainment Glut, episode 40. But in so many stories, we also are more concerned than ever about how the story of the story.
The behind the scenes.
Behind the scenes. DVDs open that up. News stations are always, or websites are always everything that ever happens. And before,
authors have blogs and Twitter feeds that kind of drip feed more info.
Before, what you would get was the completed thing, and then you would judge the completed thing, not how did the completed thing get here and all that other stuff. And so it's created multiple layers of, I guess, opportunity to criticize. Whether you should or not is something we're constantly wrestling with.
Yeah. I mean, personally, I've never been a fan of Death of the Author because that seems to just imply that you can read whatever you want into a story.
Which I think is not fair to the story.
No, I don't think so either. But at the same time, even George MacDonald, I think it was George MacDonald, I always remember that John Baylor sent us a link with a really fascinating essay. His and if you look at some of his fairy tales, this makes total sense where he really doesn't spell everything out. Some of it is much more Miyazaki-like, much more like, not abstract, but like impressionistic in some ways.
So things are applicable in multiple ways.
Right.
Which doesn't mean you can apply anything to it, but it has a wider range of possibilities. Yeah.
Well, I mean, you were just mentioning before we started recording that that's one thing about fiction in general, that you're not saying something too specific.
You're saying something, you're saying something, but you're not writing an essay. You're not saying, here's my thesis. You're saying, here is the lived out parable of these ideas, hopefully in a true sense.
Yeah.
I don't know if that sentence made any sense at all. I'll write a story about it sometime, and you can make what you want of it.
Or something. So like I said, audience relationship with stories. I think it's been a wide topic. We've gotten a lot of mileage out of it.
And we'll probably continue to get mileage out of it.
Most likely. Creator angst or / craft.
The angst is probably as true as the craft.
Probably. But every now and then we do try to actually really focus on the creators, talk about some of their stress that they go through in creating, whether it's trying to find the balance in episode 2, all the way back in episode 2, the balance between commercial versus artistic vision, or of course the most classic episode 55, writer's block.
Yep.
Any student can understand having to press through with that, or even more practical things like episode 61, self-promotion, episode 74, goals.
Or things you wrestle with as artists, like comparing yourself to others, episode 88.
Or again, more very specific things like the benefits of outlining a story versus just doing it all improv. That was episode 44.
Because we've created various things and we're constantly relearning how to do these things because, it's not like we do it every day necessarily, unfortunately. And it's something that I think all writers and creators have to figure out, how am I going to get from nothing on this page or nothing on this film to something, and then how am I going to make it look good after that? Yep. And then how am I going to suffer through people not liking it or not reading it or reading it or how do you bring something into existence, which is not an easy thing. And it's amazing that we do it at all.
That's true. It's a form of creation. That's in some ways, I always like to say, Dorothy Sayers pointed me onto this. In some ways, writing is a form of creation that helps us most closely resemble our creator, because the whole bringing something out of nothing. Yep. We're still like reforming words and ideas and topics and things like that, but it's still the closest we have to emulating God in that way.
And so much, and I don't know if we've talked about this directly, so much of creativity too is in some ways an act of discovery.
Yeah.
I mean, even if you're planning it out, you're basically discovering as you plan it. You either discover it early or discover it late. I mean, there's only two ways to do it.
That's true.
You're learning sometimes as you're creating, I think most times. And that's the part put inside all these just practical things of how do you revise and how do you make sense, how do you explain a complicated idea to a person. That was always my thing growing as a writer. Like, this didn't make any sense to this person. I should probably explain more. So,
and even for listeners who aren't writers, storytellers themselves, I think it's useful to be able to get inside the creator's head. I mean, we just talked about that in the previous topic, but yeah, writers are complicated beasts.
And I'm always fascinated. Like I've done very little filmmaking, but I'm always fascinated just hearing the process, how they go about doing things and setting things up and making decisions about what to cut and not cut.
Oh yeah, I mean, we focus on the crafting of the story itself a lot because we both have interest in writing, but from my own experience in filmmaking and from experiences in other things like when we got to interview Lauren Nichols in the theater realm, each storytelling venue has its own challenges.
Yes.
But there's a lot of overlap. We were even able to talk with Maze Dude, one of your musician heroes, about his creative process back in episode 68.
Yes.
So there's definitely overlap, whether you're writing a story or being creative in one of these other venues.
I think any sort of creation that requires you to do it more than once, there's some overlap. Maybe it's loose, but probably making stuff out of the wood and writing books have things that overlap. I don't make stuff out of wood, so I don't know. But.
Hard to say. But let's go into some more nuts and bolts.
Ooh, we do that
stuff.
sometimes, don't we?
We do, and I just call this story basics, and this includes things like in our very first episode we talked about endings.
Endings. It was a great way to start,
and we did cover beginnings later on in episode 35, which was not even close to our last episode, thankfully. But we've also covered things like setting in episode 62,
side characters. I love side characters. Episode 30.
Foreshadowing, episode 98, the story engine, what's causing, especially long-going stories, what motivates the characters, keeps them going. That was episode 66. So there's some, these are like your building blocks of the story. It's hard to have any story without these particular features.
And these are all things that in some ways you almost unconsciously as you're creating to a certain extent, but as you step back and look at them and take them apart and analyze them, then you'll be like, oh, I could do this better or that better. And I think it's worth, even as a consumer, to know these things, just you can see how it works.
Yeah.
You know, in some ways you can appreciate stories more sometimes by knowing the pieces that go into it. Mm-hmm. Obviously, you want to then all fall together and be this whole and not this seamless thing. But it's nice sometimes to, after the initial thing, pull it apart and be like, oh, this really works. And this is why I felt this. And oh, that was good foreshadowing. And
yeah. You know, a story works when you're not like distracted too much by like seeing all the parts.
Yeah.
But like then that's on a rewatch when you want to be able to like really dissect it.
And this is the sort of stuff now that I'm teaching English for middle school is that we talk about like, hey, see this foreshadowing here. See how the setting influences the character, or, you know, that's the sort of stuff you teach in English because it helps them understand not just, oh, I enjoy that story, but why was it enjoyable? Or why did it say this? You know, how did it say this thing?
Mm-hmm. All right, and then we go from there, from a very basic stuff to more specialized category where we talked about different genres and
We've
formats.
done a lot of these.
We have done a lot of these because each one of these is very ripe for exploration. Some of these are very specific types of stories, like episode 12, we did YA fiction. Episode 23, short stories. Episode 76, mythology. Episode 105, Bible stories.
That was a nice one.
That was fun. Each one of those big picture categories can have some of these kinds of things in it, the more genre stuff, like episode 18, tragedy, episode 19, comedy. Romance was in episode 27. We talked about aliens, which is a part of sci-fi in episode 70.
And politics. I remember talking politics. That was fun in 73.
That was interesting.
That was last election, wasn't it? Right before last election?
Yeah, I think it was around 2016 era. Yeah. Which politics is one of those things that could almost be put in this next category because as a genre, you're talking more things like
West Wing,
government-based stories, but it also fits in Star Wars and other stuff.
Episode 8 and 9 we have rehashed numerous times, which is adaptations or remakes because it keeps happening. It keeps happening. We keep remaking it.
Yep.
And that's just a fascinating thing. And that tends to overlap also with the fandom and the audience thing. So it's a constant thing of interest.
To re-explore, see how new people are doing it. And I remember we had a dream at some point when we talked about this.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, I think people are getting better at it in terms of, and it's still not perfect, but the ones that can like add something, particularly remakes and adaptations, they're very similar, but the ones that can add something new without losing, like you said, what made people love it in the first place.
Yeah.
So anyway, like I said, we've explored a lot of genre stuff. If you wanted to take a look at that, that'll be in the show notes. Okay, so the next category I had was story ingredients, and this is the one I said politics could go either way.
This is enjoy. These are fun. One of my personal favorite of these episodes, I think, was 63. Talking about music and stories.
So these are all ingredients that can be in a story, but not necessarily essential for a story. Obviously, stories in different mediums will employ some of these and some won't. Like a book won't necessarily have music in it. Or audio, like we talked about in episode 90.
Yeah.
But they
will hopefully have character clothing.
True.
Episode 82.
But I would imagine not every story would necessarily highlight what a character is wearing.
No.
But that was a very interesting topic.
Yes.
I don't remember ever seeing anyone else talk. Well, I'm sure there are probably costume designers. I'm sure there's blogs about it. But it's not one that gets talked about in the public zeitgeist very often. So that was a fun one to tackle.
Doubles was fun. Episode 103, we talked about twins and clones, and
that was very unusual. And I was really surprised at how many categories we found.
There was a lot. It was a unique episode. Yeah.
Sometimes it was hard to pick a specific category, and some of these episodes really fall under multiple categories. I've already mentioned medium several times, so I put that underneath this category, episode 89, but it could have fallen under. Again, how is a story influenced by the medium that it's told in, whether it's a movie, a book, audio drama?
One of the things we talk about a lot, and I don't know, well, you and I talk about, I don't know how often in the podcast, is the book, How to Read a Comic? Is that what it's called?
Understanding Comics.
Understanding Comics, which is a comic book about how to understand comics. And it's fascinating. And I think we've mentioned it here, but we've talked about it a lot off air too. Just because it's so...
It was very influential. Like it really stuck in my mind, the things that it talked about, and it presented. Obviously, it presented in a nonfiction way some really interesting concepts. because I still always go back to the whole abstract thing.
Yes.
Like he really changed my perspective on. Scott McCloud is the author, artist of it. But he really brought out the idea of how you're able to read things more personalized ideas into something if it's more abstract. And obviously he's using that in an art sense, but I think it applies to a lot of other stuff.
I agree. And it is something we came back to a lot too, not just in story ingredients, but in all these categories. How do these things move around from medium to medium? You know, between comic book and movie. You know, they all have different angles, but they use a lot of the same jargon.
Oh, yeah. Or like episode 51 where we talked about redemption. Redemption can appear in stories in any medium.
Yeah.
And so that's not really necessarily the point, but not every story necessarily has a redemptive element to it.
Or like in something we've talked about, like episode of 94, silence. Silence comes off differently in different, you know, comic book silence is different.
It could
you
be.
can have pages without dialogue.
That's true.
Versus, you know, a book where there's just no talking, they're walking, versus a movie where it's just silent.
Yeah, that's true. So yeah, it's fun to look through that list. Then, of course, we get philosophical on Derailed Trains occasionally.
These are probably my favorites, honestly.
The philosophical ideas. Well, I think some of our most important, and it's always interesting to me to look through like what we did for our first 10 episodes. I think we definitely hit some ideas we knew would be important foundational ones. And episode 4 was moral universe, which we also explored the same idea somewhat in episode 65 when we talked about worldview. The moral universe idea was the idea that your story has a certain kind of morality to it.
Yes.
A moral universe. And you should build a story with that understanding in mind.
And I think these philosophical ones are so important to us, partly because we do come from a Christian worldview, and we're not interpreting stories just as, oh, they're stories, but like stories say something, you know, and stories shape how you think. And that's something why we care about stories. And so that's what we constantly are interacting with. You know, we have profanity, we talk about beauty.
Episode 31 is profanity, beauty. Episode 48.
I love 78, which is everything is story. That was a fun one.
Yeah, talking about how real life is a story of a sort. And of course, the challenge with all these things we really tackled in episode 57, where we talked about the message in a story, because it's very tricky to. You want to be able to convey, and in every story we said conveys a message of some sort. But sometimes you really want to make it more clear than in other stories what you're trying to say in your story.
And you don't want to make the story also just a sermon.
Because then it's not really a story.
It's not a story, yeah.
Or at least not a very good one.
If you want to make a sermon, write a sermon. You know, don't make it into a story.
Yeah. That's always been an interesting challenge. And related to that, we've also occasionally tackled, not very often, but we're interested in controversies, apparently. But we've sometimes delved into certain storytelling ethics for the creators and consumers. Things like what we said a minute ago, profanity, episode 31. Also, explicit contents was episode 47. Magic for some people is an issue.
I remember in college, that came up all the time. We always had these discussions about magic because Harry Potter was getting real big, and we're at this Christian college and trying to work through that. And different people came from very different backgrounds and that sort of thing.
That was episode 17. And episode 95, actually, we've dropped all 4 of the episodes on this category, but stories as an idol, I thought was an important thing for us to tackle too, because as much as we enjoy fandoms and we enjoy stories, we've seen cases where someone's passion for story in one form or another becomes unhealthy.
Because obviously we enjoy stories. We think they're a great blessing and great, you know, can be very good in the world, but they're not everything. And they need to be in their proper place.
And the final category, just
for fun.
For fun. We've had some anniversaries and specials like this one, and where we've done recaps. Episode 20 was our first recap episode. Episode 34, we did a fake recap
which
episode.
Was pretty great. Is that when we had our argument over Frog and Toad?
Yeah, which was better, Frog or Toad and Curious George. It was basically recapping.
It was Frog and Toad.
What?
It was Frog and Toad.
I thought it was Curious George.
No, you were wrong. I'll bring the either out for Curious George again.
Anyway, we recapped episodes that had never actually happened, which was a lot of fun. So we've done a couple of those, and of course, episode 100, Journey to Tanner Mountain, is one of our all-time favorites.
I do think episode 80 might be our most misunderstood episode.
Unfortunately, that was our fake Q&A where we answered questions that you listeners had not actually sent in.
And actually, as if you had sent them in.
Yeah, except the idea was to be very satirical, and we didn't sell the satire very well, apparently.
Apparently not.
Everyone who listened to it thought that they were real questions. So I still feel kind of bad about that one.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's a big picture view of 10 years of
10
podcasting.
years, Tim. Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. So you can tell stories are a very rich venue to talk about. I know sometimes people hear, oh, we're talking about stories, and they don't necessarily get what they expect out of our podcast because, I mean, that's still a lot of categories. As much as we're able to narrow them all into these certain categories, that's still a lot of ground between basics of storytelling, genre-specific things, and some of these more like wrestling with the interesting ramifications of stories.
Mm-hmm. And I think we always had planned to kind of have a wide-ranging discussion in our story school. And obviously, I think probably some topics have hit people differently than others. I think most of them I've really enjoyed one way or another. We always have this thing when we get done with the podcast, I'm like, that was good. I like that. Almost every episode.
And sometimes we're more certain about what we're getting into than others discussions. You're like, well, we have enough to talk about here, or we'll have an idea that's kind of nebulous. But I think we've actually been able to hash things out. We've had enough episodes under our belt. We know a little bit better what we're doing.
And it's funny because sometimes we come in and we know exactly what we're going to talk about. Sometimes we come in like, we don't know what the answer to this is, but let's talk about it anyways.
And see if we can find an answer. And if not, it's still worth wrestling with. Sometimes the questioning something is just as good to prevent yourself from just kind of taking something at face value.
Yeah.
Anyway, hopefully you enjoyed that long, this may be a longish episode, but that's okay because it's our 10th anniversary. And hopefully that inspired you to go check out some episode that you missed in the past. And let us know. I'd love to hear from you. What's one of your favorite things that we've tackled or ways that we've tackled something?
Yes.
If there's something that we do on our podcast that really speaks to you, I'd love to hear about it. So maybe we can do more of that.
Sounds good to me.
With that, we will, of course, though, go next into soundtrack.
1, 2, 3, hit it!
Okay, for soundtrack today, I went back to September 2010.
Ooh, the month in which we birthed this podcast.
Indeed, and I found one that seemed appropriate. This one's called Parties Over Here.
All right.
Because this is a party thing. This is by Ocean's Andrew. It's a remix of music from Donkey Kong Country and Donkey Kong Country 2. And it's very pop, electric guitar based. So I hope you all have fun with this and rock out with us.
Hey, it's the party song. Party's over here. Come on!
Okay, and we're back.
Hello. That was fun.
Good. I'm glad you enjoyed it.
We had some good cake and ice cream during the break.
Good stuff. Okay, so we're going to continue our previously on experience. Moving on from Story School, we're going to go recap every soundtrack we've done. No, I'm kidding.
That's for you, Zach. Actually, was it episode 50 had a recap of the previous soundtracks, didn't it? I made that.
That's true.
I cut together like I don't know how many songs into a 5-minute montage.
It was just fun, and you haven't done that again.
No, it was fun, but it took some time.
There's 50 more songs you can pick
I know.
from now.
I don't.
Over 50.
Our question for people who want to re-listen to our old soundtracks: are the YouTube playlists up to date or not?
I will try to make them up to date when this episode comes out.
So we do
as
have
much
on
as possible.
we do have YouTube. We have a playlist of all our previous soundtracks, Tim's list and my list, and my list is a fun one to listen to. Like it feels very me.
I enjoy my list too. Thank you very much. Yeah, I don't think it's been updated for a while, but I'll check. There are some tracks that unfortunately I don't know are
They've been
available
pulled off
Anymore.
and
They've
stuff,
been pulled
yeah.
off of OC Remix.
You know, some of the Brandon Strader stuff got pulled off.
Yeah, well, and he put up some of them on his own YouTube channel,
Okay.
so I can include those, but there's some that just aren't available anywhere, I don't think. Well, on YouTube anyway.
Yeah.
So if you really want to listen to it, go check out our episode. They're still
there.
there. But seriously, I thought it'd be fun since, and I think I had mentioned we do this last time, but we decided to push it back to this episode. We've done summer movie recaps over
Yes.
the last few years. Unfortunately, this year we really cannot do that.
No, I did not go to the theater this summer.
Neither did I. Well, you just went to the theater for the first time
I
recently,
did,
apparently.
and there was like 12 people in it. It was like very sparse.
Yeah, I do want to go see Tenet myself.
It is
but
great.
I thought it'd be fun since we've done summer recaps, and in episode 72 we talked about the value of shared experience.
Yes, because I think going to the movie theater is an important, not important, but a special.
It is a special thing. And so since we haven't been able to do that in much of 2020, I thought it'd be fun to look back and talk about some of those things. Some of those things we've talked about on this podcast because we go to a lot of summer movies. That's when the superhero movies come out traditionally.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's something unique about the movie experience, just going into especially if it's a movie that people have been excited to see. We talked back at the end of when we did our last summer recap last year. And looking back, we may have sounded a little blasé about Avengers Endgame. I think that was just because what else can you say about Endgame at that point?
Yeah.
But in all honesty, that really was a special experience. The culmination of 10, 12 years of Marvel movies.
Yeah.
And if you go on YouTube and watch the audience reactions of some of that final scene, it still will give me goosebumps.
Oh, that fight! You mean the fight scene?
Oh,
Or-
yeah.
yeah. That thing. Oh, that was so great, and all the people coming out. Yeah, it
all
was
the
good.
people coming
it was
out of the
completely
portals.
worth it. Yeah.
Oh yeah. I mean, that was just like because the whole audience is like ready to see some of this
Yep.
stuff.
Yep.
And
So my brother used to go to a lot of midnight showings, which are not really a thing anymore, and that was a shared experience that was really kind of special back in like late '90s.
that's true. Or early 2000s.
Early 2000s. He went to all the Star Wars midnight. Like I never like going to midnight showings because midnight's really late.
I never did very many. I do remember one of the most special ones I recall actually in 2005. This would have been The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe.
Oh wow!
Which was super fun because I remember we hadn't thought we would get to see him in that show. And I was actually on a video shoot down in southern Indiana for something that our department was doing. But I think because of weather, it had gotten canceled early. So we were on our way home fighting snow. And we were actually like calling ahead. It's like, okay, we could go to a midnight showing for Narnia. Let's get this set up. And I had this like splitting headache. It's like, oh, I really want to see this. But so as soon as I got back to the dorm, I took 2 Advil, prayed, okay, Lord, let this thing go away. And it did. And it was fun because we went to a theater in Marion and it was full of college students.
Nice.
People from Taylor and Indiana Wesleyan. And so not just college students, Christian college students. So we were all very invested in it. And it was a lot of fun. And to put the icing on the cake, walk outside the theater, it's snowing out.
Nice.
And Christmas break is right around the corner.
I have actually a Lion Witch Wardrobe movie story.
Oh, do you?
Yeah, so Natasha really going to go see it. We're going to go see it. We're going to leave early from work, get a fender bender in the driveway at Honda.
Oh,
in
no.
Honda. Okay, so we'll try again. Like, I don't that night or next night. And we're there, and like Natasha gets like super sick, and we leave like halfway through the movie. And so it's like 3 times we finally get there. It's like, I don't know, it's like the 3rd time trying to see this movie. I don't know what was up. It was like we could not see the movie. It was
man.
still from then on. Natasha said she was never going to drink any Theraflu because that's what made her sick the one time.
Oh, really?
Yeah, like she reacted very badly to it. Yeah. Yeah.
Interesting.
So yeah, I have maybe not fond memories of Lion Witch Wardrobe, but very interesting memories.
Very specific
memories.
It was an event.
It was an event. 3 times. And like midnight shows, I did remember I went to go see Attack of the Clones. I just remember everyone, everyone cheers when the Lucasfilm thing comes up. And then when Yoda pulls his lightsaber out.
Oh, yeah.
Everyone's just like, yeah, it was so, that was probably the midnight showing I remember most for that sort of thing.
That's fun. I know you weren't a huge fan of the movies, but the Lord of the Rings movies, I remember being partly just because I remember by Return to the King, it was just so overwhelming because that was a very different style of filmmaking. I mean, this is right when like filmmaking was really changing around that time in terms of like your big blockbuster things, what you could do with CG and it actually looked good. I mean, we give CG a lot of crap because it gets used poorly sometimes.
Yeah.
But when it's used well, especially when it was brand new, it was exciting.
Yeah. I got to jump back to Star Wars. So I do remember just being super excited. So, I was a big Star Wars fan growing up. Still am.
Do tell.
Do tell. But I think I want to say like 90s, so mid-90s, they re-released.
Oh, yeah, 97, I think.
97, that sounds about right. And I remember that was the first time I got to see them in the theater and had all the extra things. That was so cool back. I'm like a freshman or something at that point, I think.
Yeah.
Maybe not even. Yeah.
Yeah, probably.
About freshman, sophomore.
I would have been junior high-ish. But because I only went and saw the first one, A New Hope.
They all came out like the same year, I think, right? They're
I think
like
so.
3 or 4 months apart.
Yeah, something like that.
That was fun. Man, that was fun.
It'd be fun to see more of them. I only saw the one because our family didn't go to the movies a whole lot at that time. It really is something that becomes very much a teenage and college years thing. And going forward, because, I mean, would you say you go to the movies more or less often than you did since you had kids?
I go less now I have kids.
Okay.
Just because, I mean, I could see in a few years going more when they're all old enough to see things.
Sure.
Especially in Kenville where it's not that expensive to take them.
Yeah, that makes sense. Speaking of Kendallville, I remember one movie. I haven't gone to see very many movies with you necessarily, but I remember one that we saw in Kendallville together.
Which was that?
Cloverfield.
Oh, that was a great experience.
that was wild because I don't think I've ever gone to see a movie like that at a theater.
No, it's so visceral. And
visceral.
At that point, that was pretty new too, that sort of.
If you don't remember Cloverfield, folks, that was a found footage movie where basically the idea was that these characters were running around with a camcorder. Actually, it was a camcorder, wasn't it? It wasn't even a phone.
No.
Nowadays it'd be on a smartphone.
Yeah.
But it was a camcorder they were running around with during a giant monster, like kaiju attack, basically on New York City.
And in the theater, it was just, I mean, once it started, it was just full blast for the whole time.
90 minutes.
And it was great.
Hardcore.
It was fun.
Yeah. Yeah. I've never seen it again. And I don't know that I would need to in some ways. It's like, because the story wasn't necessarily that deep. It was kind of sad ending.
Yeah. I still quote that to this day.
Oh, do you?
Someday I'll go to Natasha like, it was a good day.
Oh, I forgot about that. Okay. Yeah.
So,
but yeah, it was an experience that was made all the more palatable because it was not palatable, memorable because it was on the big screen.
So speaking of Kenville theater experiences, the famous Hayden experience.
Is this Jurassic Park?
That's the second favorite. Yeah, well, I've said that on the podcast, so I don't necessarily need to rehash that. I may have said this one too, but when Aladdin came out, right?
Okay.
It was packed. Like the balcony was open. Even like they never opened the balcony. And I think we literally went like 5 times.
Wow.
To see Aladdin. Like we loved this movie. And yeah, I just remember it being almost the fullest I've ever seen. And I remember just being, it must just hit the right movie at the right age. Just, when he's on the snow thing and the tower's rolling down, the window, he hides the window. I just thought that was the coolest thing ever.
Wow.
Like it was just hit just right. And I don't just remember a movie. I remember the theater and the people,
Sure.
which I don't always do.
So I'll just share a story from one of my old friends, Tim Mondor. Apparently, when he saw Aladdin, I don't know if you remember this, way before NCG, Auburn had this other small little
Yes,
movie
yeah,
theater
I've been there.
over near Skating
I
Station.
saw my dad and I. Sorry, I interrupted your story with my story. My dad and I, we used to go to whatever science fiction fantasy film we could see because there was like nothing out except we went to see Stargate and went to see Starship Troopers, which we shouldn't have, and others just Titan AE. Because he and I like that sort of stuff. Or Battlefield Earth.
I'm sorry.
I know we watched all these bad movies because there was nothing out that was science
Sci-fi,
fiction.
yeah.
But we went to go see Final Fantasy the movie
Oh, really?
at the little Auburn Theater.
Oh, wow.
But I was super disappointed.
Because it is not very Final Fantasy.
It is not Final Fantasy at all. I mean, it's not a bad movie now, but it was just like it was so disappointing.
Aw.
Go ahead.
So anyway, my friend Tim, when he saw Aladdin there, and apparently right at the point where, Aladdin's hanging off the cliff, Jafar dresses the beggar.
Oh, yeah.
Is raising his dagger and saying, giving you your reward.
Yeah.
Your eternal reward.
Yeah.
And he's about to stab him. Apparently the power went out right there. And they didn't get to finish the movie. So they had to go home with that cliffhanger.
Oh, man.
I think it's an amazing story.
Okay, worst film experience. Worse than watching Battlefield Earth.
Oh my.
It was a kind of a one, but kind of the low point where it was kind of shabby and run down and wasn't For some reason, my mom and I went to go see Godzilla 2000. I think.
Dear.
Just because, why not?
Oh dear.
And started watching it, but it was out of focus, and they never fixed the focus, and we waited for we watched 20 minutes of it, not being able to see anything, and then we just left because it was yeah.
It's a bad movie anyway.
So
probably saved you some
not
time.
I don't think it wasn't the American one. It was Godzilla 2000, I think. In '97, the American one came out.
Oh, that was 97? I thought that was in 2000.
Am I wrong? May I have my
Was it
dates
set
wrong.
in New York City?
No, it's not that. I saw that one too.
Okay.
A different time,
Which is also bad. Okay.
But yeah, it's bad. Yeah.
Okay, then
It was one after that, I think.
Okay.
But
I thought-
imported or something.
I thought the American one did come out in 2000.
maybe
so that's
I could maybe
I
it was
could be
something
wrong
else.
though. I'm sure Nathan could correct us.
He will correct us.
Over on Monster Island, yeah, I'm sure he is correcting us at Facebook or in the comments or both. I'm trying to think bad movie experiences. Thankfully, I don't know that I've had many, in part because most of the time when I go to see a movie, it's one that I've heard of before or really bad. Okay, probably the two worst I can think of. Saw the second Street Fighter movie at a theater. Which would probably actually be really entertaining with riff tracks, but without, it was just bleh. I remember why we went to see that. I was with my D&D group at the time. And then, The Happening.
Oh, I saw that. Yeah.
That was
different.
disappointing.
Yeah.
That was, yeah.
Have you ever had a really bad audience?
That's a good question. Babies crying, that kind of thing.
Sometimes in Kenville, if it's the first night of something, there'll be lots of middle schoolers and young high schoolers who are just...
Yeah, I haven't been to Kenneville as often as you have. I've been there for one times when they're more just running back and
or
forth.
talking constantly or just...
Yeah.
it's just
That's
usually
never,
opening night for some sort of big movie. Sometimes that'll happen. It's frustrating. You're watch the movie.
Yeah, I'm more selective when I will go to Kenneville. I'll go to Kenneville for if I've seen the movie once before, or if it's I'm going at a time. Okay, I think the kids will not be here, or this will be a more reasonable experience. Yeah, there's certain movies I would not go to Kenneville for, even though I know it's cheaper. It's not necessarily. It's a longer drive for me. Too.
For you, yeah. I walk a block. And
Yeah.
it's there basically. So
Right. Yeah, it makes sense.
So we've been on vacation sometimes. Or we take our summer vacation, and a lot of times we'll go to a movie at some point.
Yeah.
And those stick in my mind, I think, just because they're a different location. But it's interesting. I think we've seen at least 2 Nolan movies like that.
Oh, really? Okay.
Inception, we're in Florida, and I just remember watching Inception, and at some point turning to Zach and being like, "We're still on the airplane." We're 4 levels in or something like that. And then we saw in Maryland, we saw Dark Knight Rises.
Okay.
In a very interesting, and I think Natasha remembers that one because it was right after, during Dark Knight, they had all the shooting, so all the theaters were a little worried about so she remembers that sort of thing going on.
I don't think I've ever gone on vacation. One time I remember going to the usual place. I think I was in Indianapolis. I don't remember if this was during a homeschool convention or if I was just with once or twice I went with my dad when he'd go to Indianapolis for a continuing ed thing, and because we were doing some hiking or something afterwards. Anyway, we saw Galaxy Quest, which was kind of a gamble because we've never gone to a lot of comedies, but it's like, it's Star Trek themed. I think it could be fun. And man, Galaxy Quest is a lot of fun.
Yeah.
But speaking of Inception, okay, so Inception came out while I was still in film school.
Okay.
And so I went with a lot of fellow film students, and man, we had fun with that movie. Oh man, we were so pumped for that movie before and after. It was such a major talking point. And I remember because we went to it wasn't at midnight, but we went to probably got done around 11 o'clock at night or something. Went home, went to bed.
Can you go to bed after that?
Man, I've never had so much fun being paranoid in my own dreams. Am I dreaming? Am I not? It was so much fun.
Because it's so immersive.
It really is. And you're deep dive. I mean, it is a deep dive.
I'll say,
movie.
and again, movie experiences. Natasha and I were talking after seeing Tenet, and we didn't know if it was because it's a weird movie and you're fully invested for 2.5 hours, or because it's the first time we've been in the theater for so long. But like our perception was a little wonky afterwards for a while.
Oh,
not
really?
like I couldn't see, but you just had this sense that something is there that you can't quite see. And I think it's probably because it's a Nolan movie and you're just immersed in this weird technology. It probably was also, we hadn't been through a 2.5 hour movie at a theater for who knows how long.
I mean, that is one of the most fun things about going to see a movie at the theater, because you really do feel like you step into another world.
Yeah.
I think we've said this before.
I felt that with John Carter.
Yeah, John Carter was a great example of that because it was such another place. A good Star Wars movie get you feel like that. Any of them that really take place somewhere else, and sometimes even ones that take place in our world, if it's like, I don't know, a certain style
or maybe historical even.
Yeah, something like that. So this is not related to that necessarily, but I have to mention a fun experience when we went and saw Captain America: The Winter Soldier.
Okay.
And my brother-in-law will know exactly what we're talking about here. So there's a part where one of a politician whispers to one of the special agents or whatever they are, where they whispers, "Hail Hydra." And my sister Joanna whispered to me, it's like, "Wait, what did he say?" And so I whispered back to her, "Hail Hydra." And then of course immediately my brother-in-law Eric is like, "You're one of them. You're Hydra." Because
That's awesome.
Because I knew what was going to happen, sort of. But like, in order to answer her question, I had to do the exact thing that the bad guy had just done.
That's hilarious. So yeah, there's a lot of good memories with going to because it's an event. I mean, or it can be, a movie can be an event.
Yeah.
With people you can share it with. And sometimes, at least in my experience, I tend to go most often with the family. It's a holiday and we'll go, and it's Christmas break and we'll go see a movie, or it's we'll be on vacation, we'll all go. I remember seeing, there's not even reason to remember the movie except I saw it during a vacation, which was Cowboys and Aliens.
Oh, yeah.
So I just remember because we all got in the car and we all drove there and we all saw it.
There's also something special when you know that you're experiencing a great story, a great movie for the very first time.
It's exciting. You can't ever recapture the first time.
No, there's something special. And like, I remember thinking during the Toy Story 2, actually, because this is when animated movies were kind of hit and miss.
Yeah.
Especially sequels back then. And I remember thinking, like, around the time of the whole Buzz Lightyear and Zurg scene, and they're like leaving for the airport, I remember thinking, how can this be this good? Like, this is amazing. And how is this possible?
When you see really good movies for the first time, especially in a theater, like seeing them at home, fine, but there's just something special about it's dark. You're completely invested. There's no distractions. And you're just like, okay, I'm watching Tenet. Somewhere near there, I'm just kind of laughing to myself. I'm so happy that this movie exists in this timeline. Whether it's a great movie or later on I don't like as much, this thing someone created and it's here and it's enjoyable.
Yep. So as much as I appreciate things like Disney Plus and streaming and all that stuff, I never want to see movie theaters completely go away.
Yeah,
because they provide something special and valuable. And that's a good transition to another topic I thought it would be fun to discuss here. I don't know, this is kind of previously on. Well, I guess in episode 24, we talked about Lest Other Old Stories Be Forgot. That's the name of the episode. We talked about how our reactions to stories have changed over time. But I thought it could also be fun to talk about how pop culture has changed in the 10 years since we started this. you think about it, Nick, when our first episode came out 10 years ago, there were only 3 MCU movies out.
Wow.
The first 2 Iron Man movies and The Incredible Hulk, which is basically apocryphal at this point.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah, I remember, I think at some point, probably in our, I don't remember if it was before, talking about like wondering what this new Thor movie would be like.
Yep,
Because
yep.
I don't know anything about Thor.
And they've paid it off.
They paid it off.
They've earned our trust.
They
for
did
now,
earn
at
our
least.
trust. And it's interesting to see none of the imitators really were able to pull off what the MCU could pull off. Now, I should say, I don't necessarily know that people should give up on that. Apparently, what DC movies, I've heard some people speculate what they're doing is they're going into more of a multiverse approach.
Which sounds...
Where they're all part of a continuity, but they're all a multiverse. They're different timelines. So you don't have to worry about continuity and stuff, which that sounds fine. But at the same time, like, do you really even need to call it a multiverse? I know just because that is a thing in the DC universe that they've done that a lot. But at the same, it's like, but they're not really connected then.
You know, the interesting about pop culture in some ways is that not that I was ever like super connected with all pop culture, but probably less so in some ways. But I think that's partly because pop culture is so wide now, because we didn't have streaming when we started this,
Yeah.
or at least not in the same. I was still getting discs from Netflix
That's true.
back when we started this thing.
Yeah, I think I remember you mentioned you had listened to an older episode and we talked about how cool it was that Netflix was making their own TV show.
Yeah, exactly.
And we were like, wow, that sounds really novel. I wonder what they'll come up with.
Exactly.
That's been good and bad, actually.
Yeah. So what we have is that we have such a wide range of things between all the streaming services and stuff that pop culture is so wide that you really only know sections of it.
Yeah, that's true.
And there's some big things that I never got on board with. Like I never watched Game of Thrones or Walking Dead
Yeah.
or things like that.
Or Breaking Bad.
Breaking Bad. We talked about getting on that.
Well, we never
wagon.
did.
No, we
Yeah.
never did.
But yeah, it's interesting to me. I remember when Janelle and I were doing our wedding registry, we wandered over into like the media pop DVDs and
Yeah.
video game section, and they have the whole like little section at the Target we were at for like pop culture doodads, like
Yeah.
little figurines and shirts and T-shirts and stuff, and very nerdy stuff in a Target.
It had become much more pop culture is normal
Yeah.
at this point. And nerd is normal.
It
I
is-
mean,
and
nerd interest at least.
Yeah, and it's not always done well. I mean, like I looked at all that stuff. It's like, man, so much nerdy stuff, so much junk.
Yeah.
Like none of it looked like anything I was interested in.
Yeah.
So it's not all sun and roses, but there's a glut of it out there. As
But
we
like
mentioned.
Think Geek is not necessarily a niche thing anymore.
What?
Think Geek, that sort of
Oh,
store.
Think Geek. Yeah, that's true. It's more acceptable to talk about this stuff, which is fascinating. I mean, it was trending that way. I think even in the decade before.
Yeah.
The decade that we've been podcasting in, but it's become even more so.
You know, it helped probably in some ways. You know, when we started, I think, you know, Harry Potter was just finishing up probably. Lost was just finishing up. You had these
Lord of the Rings.
Lord of the
Well,
Rings.
I mean, earlier back.
But you had at least a number of very high profile, very popular speculative fiction.
Yeah,
kinda
because
geeky
Harry Potter the movies, yeah, that was finishing up really close to the time we I think that was the end of 2010 ish.
Was it? I don't know that.
I forget,
But
for sure.
you know, and that's still you know the whole generation that they're still wearing. You know, I got kids in my class who are still wearing Gryffindor T-shirts and stuff. You know,
Yeah,
so it's still a thing.
but it probably didn't open the doors, and movie studios knew they wanted. I remember actually reading articles several years ago. They were desperately looking for the next franchise. This was before MCU was a thing, because like Batman had been done plenty.
Yep.
Harry Potter was ending. Lord of the Rings was long done.
Yep.
Well, Hobbit movies, I guess, but still.
yeah.
Star Wars was, well, for a little while it was done. Then it started up again.
Yep.
But they'd become so dependent on big name franchises, tentpole things in terms of like getting the big revenue, the big bucks. That is one of the main things that like brings people back into the movie theater.
Yeah.
For better and for worse.
Yeah.
As much as we enjoy these adaptations and new big blockbuster things, it does mean there's fewer people like Christopher Nolan who can do the really
The
innovative
original,
new
yeah.
stuff. So yeah, it's interesting.
And it just keeps moving.
It just keeps moving. And we mentioned again, streaming has become way bigger in the last 5-10 years. Actually, it's interesting to think about online video in particular. When I was working at Archery Tag 2012 to 2014, in some ways I think that was really exciting time on YouTube. And because I was trying to do stuff with YouTube, then I learned a lot very quickly about all the different venues and stuff. And YouTube is still a very thriving thing, but a lot of the like freshness, at least, and this is my perspective, I'm not quite as hardcore into it as I used to be, but it feels like some of the freshness of like the Wild Westness of the internet has kind of gone away, which is a little unfortunate. Everything's become a little bit more institutionalized, and the big name companies and the really big YouTubers.
You know what's an interesting trend that we don't talk about book trends much because we're not usually up to date on book trends. But I do know that Natasha, my wife, continues to find tons of stories inspired by fairy tales. It just has continued on.
I was wondering about that because she joined us for that YA episode back in episode 11, which is over 100 episodes ago now. And I wonder if that episode is really outdated now, but they're still, YA is still big on the fairy tales.
Fairy tales is still a big thing, and at every level. Like my daughter Serenity, she's in 3rd grade. There's this whole realm of
which is not really YA, but still.
No, but I mean, even at that level, there's tons of fairy tales, and then Theo has lots of myths and fairy tales sort of related stuff. It's. I mean, once upon a time, we commented on Weekly Hijack. Probably didn't hurt by any means the whole.
Yeah.
But the constantly reinterpretation of not just fairy tales, but just even that Zet guys to use it twice in one episode of, fairies and curses and witches, and is just very thriving thing still.
Yeah, that's cool. I mean, and it makes
now they
some
get
sense.
darker and darker to a certain extent too.
True, sure. That makes some sense because fairy tales have been popular for hundreds of years now. But it's nice that it hasn't just been the kind of modern retelling of them. It wasn't just a fad that went away.
It doesn't seem like it. I mean, it seems like it's still a thing.
That's cool.
So
that's cool. People sometimes say that when a new medium starts overshadowing an old one, people think that the old medium will go away.
Yeah.
And sometimes it happens. I mean, we don't have shadow plays aren't a thing as much, or
no, but yeah.
But I mean, they still exist in some like a historical curiosity. But there's other things like radio has never completely gone away.
No, podcast basically
reinvented it, redid radio dramas. People thought movies would die out because of television. We still have television.
Yep.
We still have movies and television.
Yep.
TV hasn't completely gone away just because we have internet streaming now, and magazines. They're on the border, but but they still exist in certain pockets, and they may be more of a niche audience, but they're still there. And I kind of think that there's something to be said too about genres that, like, I think there are very few genres that ever disappear completely.
I think you're right. I think it's just kind of this ebb and flow.
Mm-hmm. Like westerns were huge for a long time in the 40s through the 60s.
Yeah.
And now they're not as much, but every now once in a while they'll pop up and people will be like, "Oh, a western. Yeah, let's try this out." And superheroes are very big, and I don't think they're going away anytime soon.
No, probably not.
But it's possible that by the time we're retired age, maybe that'll be kind of the passé thing.
Well, like I mentioned, when Dad and I tried to go see anything that was remotely fantasy sci-fi, there just wasn't much good back in the 90s necessarily, but there's a glut of it now.
Yeah. Well, at least in some form. It seems to me like fantasy movies are still not necessarily...
Fantasy is still pretty rough.
It's still
science fiction, you can get a lot of
side.
science fiction stuff.
Yeah.
Not good hard science fiction, but like post-apocalyptic sort of stuff.
Did you see the trailer for the new Dune movie?
I saw I think it was the preview for the trailer. It was at Tenet. It was like a short one saying, "Go see the trailer."
Oh, really?
Sort of thing.
Okay.
But yeah, what made me most want to do is read the book again.
Oh, I was wondering if you'd ever read it.
It's been a long time. It was like in high school.
Okay. Anyway, it's interesting to think about all the stuff. Yeah, when we first started recording this podcast, we had no idea that we'd ever get more Star Wars movies.
We did not.
And that's exploded thanks to Mr. Disney. Well, his company anyway.
Yes.
One more question I thought would be fun to tackle that's not in our list here. Talking about how things change over time.
Yes.
Do you think that your tastes, storytelling instincts have changed much over the last 10 years?
Storytelling or story watching?
Let's say storytelling. What's important to you as a storyteller or as a consumer, I guess? I don't mean just like your viewing habits.
Okay. I guess as a creator, I don't know that it's so much change as continued to, I don't know if deepen is the right word, evolve in the sense, not evolve sounds weird. It's like, for instance, the easy way for me to look at it is look at my flash fictions. Okay, I have 140 something. The early ones versus the later ones, I can see a trend of how I can do sentences and words and what I can how I craft the stories. They've in some ways become less direct.
Okay.
Which I don't know if is good or bad. But I think the things that I care most about, which is the interaction between man and God and worldview stuff and whatever, I think has never really changed. I just find different clothes for it. I mean, because a lot of the old ideas I had back in high school and early college are still ideas I want to do. So I don't think the core of things have really changed, but maybe my ability or the way I would approach it, I've gotten more, I don't know if it's abstract, but more less straightforward, which is probably not easy.
Probably. Yeah, I was gonna say, have you read Strid and Fred recently?
I know, but the last one is less straightforward than the first one.
Well,
I mean, that's kind of what I mean.
Okay.
It's more moving parts. I think I've really practiced cramming more into less.
oh, okay. Okay.
If that makes sense. Like, it's still the same thing, it's just denser,
Sure.
maybe.
Okay.
Because, like, my most recent flash fiction, not much of a story, but there's some decent ideas there. It's like 400 words. I mean, I don't even need 1,000 words anymore.
Sure.
For a lot of things.
Sure. Interesting. For myself, it's a little harder to say because my creative output has not been as consistent as yours, and it takes various different forms.
Yeah.
Whether it's just editing the podcast or making video promotions for various companies or my church. I did in the last 10 years, I did actually write a novella for our project, Children of
Yep.
the Wells. I also acted in a couple plays.
Yes.
So I got to brush up on my acting
great.
skills. So yeah, for me, my creative output takes various different forms, but I wouldn't be surprised if probably some of the certain things I used to talk about maybe soften a little bit. For instance, I used to talk a lot about the ideal hero.
Okay, yeah.
And I still like parts of that, but I think part of the reason I developed that theory was sort of a reaction against what I thought were too many gray heroes. But I do think there's been more room for the really good heroes. Like Doctor Who has some of this exploration of what it means to be good.
Yeah.
It was interesting to me, a lot of debate about Man of Steel and how Superman should be portrayed really tied into some of these things, even though I kind of liked Man of Steel, although it's been a while since I've seen it. And I think overall, I found that the ideal hero, where it's like this really pure... I got the idea a lot from watching the 1937 Robin Hood movie.
Okay,
Which
yeah.
really portrays him as this like saint, practically.
Yeah.
Which I think works for that movie. I don't know that it necessarily works super well for all movies.
Yeah.
But I still think the idea that it's more important to highlight a hero's good qualities, heroic qualities, than highlight the less desirable ones, if that makes sense.
So you have a flawed hero, but
It's not the
emphasis on the hero and not the flaw.
Yes, exactly. I think that's probably more how I would phrase it nowadays. But
Because then you can analyze why he's good if there's things that aren't good about him in
Sure.
some ways. And I mean, that's almost beneficial some ways.
in My Hero Academia, there's a Superman-like character called All Might, and he's one of these characters. I've heard a couple of people mention this, that like when he's first introduced, he seems kind of corny, but the more you know him over the course of the show, and how much the populace depends on him and puts faith in him as a shining beacon, the more you appreciate why he's worked so hard to be that. That's an example of I think a really good hero done really well. My Hero Academia is just a great superhero media in general. It's one of those, like, since it's an anime, it's very much a Japanese riff on an American idea.
Yeah.
It blends the two things really well. Like All Might's attacks are named after American cities and states.
That's awesome.
So it's definitely a kind of a love letter to American superheroes from Japan, which means they can bring some interesting new things to it, and sometimes do a fresh spin that American superhero stuff wouldn't do. But anyway, that's something of a side tangent. So one last question to wrap up this retrospective.
Yes.
What can we expect in the future?
Nothing. No.
We're done. This is
We're
the
done.
last
This is it.
episode.
Bye, guys.
No, to be honest, I think we mentioned about a year ago when we started the 100th episode that like we were entering a new phase of the podcast.
And we never quite got there yet.
we changed up the music.
Yes. Well, because it has been, I mean, there are things going on. I mean, Tim's getting married. Apparently, something's happening
Yeah,
like that.
soon.
I got career shift. So, some of the things we want to get done, we're not first. But we do hope to update our website at some point. So you can, 112 episodes is a lot to wade through.
Like we talked about today.
We'd like to find some sort of way to help people find topics they're interested in, be able to get some of the old classic stuff out.
So we've been on a blogspot site since we started this thing, which was fine starting off.
Yeah, in 2010.
In 2010, yeah. Curious who still uses Blogspot, to be honest.
I do.
Oh, well, yeah, obviously, yes. Yes, we do.
We're the last person. We also host.
It's probably not
We
true.
also host all our soundtracks on MySpace, but
That is not true, but
with our flash animation.
talking about things that have changed the last 10 years, I feel like blogging has changed a lot. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's still a thing, I guess, but it's not nearly the internet darling it used to be.
No, because you almost have to go to you almost have to be aggregated into a giant site for anyone to find it. In some ways, it's not as again that Wild Westness is
It's kind of
fallen out a
gone.
little bit. Yeah.
Yeah, which is unfortunate. But anyway, so it's been on our docket for a long time.
More than it should have been.
Yeah, and we have some definite ideas of what we want to do with the website, but it's also going to require working a little bit with a graphic designer.
Also hiring a secretary. Oh wait, no, we don't have the budget for that.
No, we don't.
Not after the swimming pool I bought.
Diamond studded one. no
Oh,
less.
it's really nice.
But so that's something long term we hope to be able to do. And once that's in place, we would like to expand again because it's been a long time since we've had guests. We've been wanting to get more guests on. We've talked about the possibility of doing panel appearances at conventions. Not that any conventions are going on right now, but these are all things we would like to do to really like broaden the appeal of the podcast. That we kind of feel like we need a better website destination for people to visit before we really start trying to branch out that way. Something to be looking forward to.
So we need a station for the derailed train.
Indeed.
All right.
I was going to say, is that what the name of the website should be? But
No, that's off track.
That's muddling the metaphor a little bit too much. All right. Well, this has been a plenty long episode, but I think it's fitting for our 10th anniversary.
10 years.
10 years.
It's our, what is that? What's 10 years? So like not paper like first year.
I don't know. I'm not married yet, so I haven't had to keep track of such
I
things.
haven't had to keep track of it. I know, as long as I know the number, I'm good.
Okay.
So.
I'll take your word for it. I hope you've been enjoying this look back. And if so, please leave us a comment. Let us know what you liked about this episode, what you think we may have missed, something that you really enjoy about the last 10 years of podcasting, the last 10 years of movies.
And you can always email us at derailedtrains@gmail.com.
And of course, those comments that you can leave, those would be at derailedtrainsofthought.blogspot.com.
And always, we would love to take audio clips from you if you would like to email them to us as well. That would be
cool. That would be a lot of fun. Give us a like over on Facebook. I mentioned earlier today, we'll see if this changed by the time this episode comes out. As an anniversary gift, you can push us over the 50 likes over on Facebook. That'd be great. And also, we're on Twitter at Derailed Trains.
very active Twitter.
Yeah, somewhat.
Yeah, we're unfortunately not very social.
Social. Okay, that's something else that's changed over the last 10 years. Social media has become a lot less social
Yeah, that's true.
and a lot less fun.
Yes.
I don't know, maybe
We gotta get on the Instagram train.
I've said before, I don't see what we would Instagram
Pictures of ourselves.
of a microphone.
No, just picture ourselves doing things, being like, pretty soon we'll record. This is a great donut right before we record. Look at my duck lips as I record.
Okay, well, the crowd over there seems very excited about
Yeah,
something.
they're like, are they saying something about a king, I think, aren't they?
I think we might have a coronation ceremony coming up here pretty soon.
All right.
So that'd be pretty cool. We got to get over there. So
Yeah,
Nick,
that'd be fun.
give us the details about your soundtrack.
All right, so my soundtrack, since the 10th anniversary, I figured instead of picking a new game like I've been going for, we'll pick our 10th remix from Chrono Trigger, one of the favorites of remixers everywhere. This is called Notes from a Small Island, remixed by JJT.
I wonder, do you think this is is Chrono Trigger the game that we've picked remixes from the most, do you think?
It's
Probably
I
up
think
there.
individually game. I think so. I mean, we probably pick more Final Fantasies.
Oh, okay.
I bet Chrono Trigger takes the cake for most
for a single
remixes.
game.
Yep. So I thought we'd revisit an old favorite for our 10th anniversary.
Fun.
Yeah, enjoy this nice jazzy kind of nostalgic song.
It's very chill. Nice way to close out. Thank you for listening to Derailed Trains of Thoughts. Until next time, this is Tim.
This is Nick.
Bye-bye.
Not what I expected when I got up this morning.